The Trump administration's crackdown on immigration is under scrutiny once again after two fatal shootings within a week. Agents from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is known as ICE, shot dead a 26-year-old Colombian man in the state of Maine on Monday, saying that he posed a threat to public security. His killing has triggered protests across the state. The incident came just days after ICE agents in Texas shot a man dead during a traffic stop. While much of the focus has been on Latino communities, they are not the only ones that ICE is targeting.
She spent decades helping immigrants, then ICE picked her up.
When they detained me, they didn't look at my ID. They didn't even ask for my documents. I offered it to them. They would not.
Meenu Batra had lived in the United States for decades. She worked as a court interpreter in the Texas immigration system. Then during a work trip, everything changed. She was stopped at an airport and detained by the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, far from her family and community. She's a mother of 4 U.S. citizens. One of them serves in the U.S. Army.
Everybody had to hold on to their own plans and projects and life and just come here and figure out what to do, how to help mom. And that was very, very painful.
Meenu came to the U.S. as a refugee in 1991 after her parents were killed in anti-Sikh violence in India. Years later, a judge allowed her to live and work in the country. In 2000, she was granted what's called withholding of removal, meaning she could not be deported to India and was allowed to stay in the U.S. But authorities now acted on an old deportation order. Her lawyer says she tried to explain her legal status. It did not matter.
Basically surrounded her at the security checkpoint as if they were taking down a big cartel member. And that's where they, in the file folder, basically, they opened the file folder once she got in the vehicle, but they basically asked her, "Are you Meenu Batra?" And when she said yes in the affirmative, they basically said, "You have an order of removal." And when she said no, I got a grant from a judge, I have permission to live and work here, they said, "No, that doesn't mean you have permission to live here forever." They literally took her and basically placed her in an unmarked vehicle.
She was taken into detention anyway. I am outside the LYA detention facility in Raymondsville, Texas, where Meenu was held after her arrest. It sits in a remote part of Texas, far from the family and community she knows. Meenu's case highlights a different reality of immigration enforcement. ICE is now targeting South Asians at much higher rates. Her case is not the only one. Immigration enforcement in the U.S. often focuses on Latino communities, but cases like Meenu's are changing that. Arrests of Asian immigrants by ICE have almost tripled, rising from under 700 in 2024 to nearly 2,000 in 2025. Indian nationals are now the second largest group affected after Chinese nationals.
There are green card holders that are at those same fears. You have H-1B visa workers, international students. We've heard from such a wide range of people who are also legally in the United States. So it's not just the undocumented populations that are walking around with concerns and fears about their right to pursue remedies here to remain, but it's the documented populations as well.
Advocates say this is changing how people see immigration enforcement in the U.S. It is not only undocumented migrants. Even people with legal status are being caught up. In a statement, ICE told DW, illegal aliens who receive these type of orders can still be detained and removed to a third country. Meenu says many in her community stay silent about cases like hers.
Because how our community is very good at sweeping things under the rug. But I know that I am not the only one. I might be the only one who's talking about it. Perhaps I'm providing safe space for people to come out and reach out.
Her story is a warning. Immigration enforcement is not just someone else's issue anymore.
I want to bring in now Julia Decker. She's the Director of Public Policy at the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota. Julia, it's good to have you with us. We just heard in that story, the story of Meenu Batra, a longtime U.S. resident, a court interpreter. She's the mother of 4 U.S. citizens. Does her case, does it reflect a broader change in how immigration enforcement is affecting immigrant communities?
I think it does. And I think that there are a couple aspects of this. One aspect, of course, is that we have seen a dramatic increase just in all immigrant communities being targeted across the United States. This includes, of course, undocumented as well as documented immigrants. And in some cases, people who are documented, that can actually in some ways sort of increase somebody's risk, because the fact that having documentation actually makes a person's presence known to the government, and that can allow the government more easily to know where a person is, to be able to go to their house to track their movements. And so we have seen, for instance, student visa holders targeted in one of the the administration's earlier crackdowns during this administration.
Well, let me ask you,
so I think that's one
you,
aspect of this.
Let me ask you though, if a person has the documents, the proper documents, then why would that be a reason? Why would that put them at any level of vulnerability when it comes to ICE?
So one of the things that we have seen with this administration is that they have moved to restrict previously legal pathways to previously lawful immigration. So for instance, visas that are currently available, they have moved to restrict. Things like temporary protected status, they have moved to terminate or restrict. And a lot of these, what quite frankly were previously very stable statuses, the administration has moved to terminate or restrict, or otherwise make much more difficult for people to access or hold on to and maintain. And so that has made it much more difficult for people to know what they have to do to maintain those statuses. And then, as we saw with some of these surges, for instance, in Minnesota, where I'm currently located, even people who had lawful statuses could be picked up, even though they were currently in status, and could end up in detention and then having to try to prove while they were in detention that everything was on the up and up. And they could spend time in jail trying to get those documents while they were sitting in jail. Okay. So the way the administration has sort of changed those tactics has just made it much more difficult and much less certain even for people with those lawful statuses. I think the other aspect of this that I do want to highlight, go ahead. Just is that I do think there is just quite frankly a racial act to all of this, right? There has been always in the U.S. psyche, in the American psyche, some sort of distinctions, poor distinctions, obviously, but distinctions with even between, sort of East, Southeast, Southwest Asians. There is this sort of underlying sort of model minority myth of, that has always been attached particularly to East Asians, that I think still lives on in some of the ways that South versus Southeast versus East versus South Asians are perceived. And I think that can be sometimes seen played out in the way that some of these enforcement actions are being implemented.
Yeah, Julie, you bring up a good point too, that there are all shades in this story that need to be reported. We appreciate you offering your insights today. Julia Decker, thank you.